Beneath the belly of the star leech, the world smelled of scorched ozone and recycled air. Silas Thorne lay on his back, his spine pressed against the cold, vibrating deck plates of Outpost Zephyr. His hands were slick with synthetic lubricant. Above him, the coolant manifold of the Frontier shuttle was weeping a slow, rhythmic drip of fluorescent green fluid. He didn't move. The silence of the dust rims was a heavy thing, broken only by the erratic hum of the ship's failing life support. In his left hand, Silas gripped a chipped ceramic mug. It was empty, save for a ring of dried sediment from his last serving of stim brew, but he held it with a white-knuckled intensity. It was the only thing in this godforsaken sector that felt solid. The wrench slipped. Silas hissed as his knuckles barked against the intake valve. He didn't curse. He simply watched a single, persistent drop of condensation roll down the side of his mug. It was perfectly clear, defying the grime of the hangar. It was a small, irrelevant miracle of physics. A shadow fell over his legs. It was followed by the sound of boots, not the heavy, clanking, magnetic soles of the station's crew, but the soft, rhythmic thrum of sylvan kin silk mesh. Silas didn't need to look up to know that his afternoon was over. "Master Pilot Thorne," a voice said. The voice was like a chime struck in a vacuum. It was the sound of Ethelgard Bastion, of high-walled palaces and neural-sensitive elites who looked at the stars as a garden rather than a graveyard. Silas slid out from under the shuttle. He didn't stand up immediately. He wiped his hands on a rag that was already too filthy to be useful. Standing before him were three royal envoys. Their skin was the color of moonlight, mapped by the faint, shimmering indigo lines of their neural veins. As they looked at him, those veins pulsed in a rapid, staccato rhythm, an involuntary species response to the sheer, chaotic heat of his human presence. "You're late for your funeral," Silas muttered, squinting against the overhead lights. "We are here by the mandate of High Warden Alara," the lead envoy said. His throat shimmered with a nervous, resonant hum. "You are summoned to Ethelgard. You have been appointed chief commander of the Aegis Weave." Silas stared at them. He thought about the 3,000 credits he owed the station's quartermaster. He thought about the fact that he hadn't seen a planet with real grass in a decade. "I'm a ferry driver," Silas said. "I move crates. I don't command weaves." "The warden does not agree," the envoy replied. "Furthermore, she has declared you her betrothed. The strategic union is already being broadcast to the Obsidian Phalanx. The tactical bond is forged." Silas felt a sudden, sharp spike of adrenaline that had nothing to do with attraction. It was a cold, jagged fear. He looked at his chip mug. He looked at the leaking shuttle. "I've spent cycles cataloging their silence, but I fear the moment they actually start to speak. You should stay, if only to see if I'm right." The journey to the heart of the Sylvan Kin territory was a blur of high-velocity transit and sterile silence. Ethelgard Bastion was a fortress world that had forgotten how to breathe behind its own armor. It was beautiful, certainly. The towers rose like crystalline needles into a sky that was permanently tinted the gold-orange of the planetary shield. But there was no wind. There was only the hum of the Aegis Weave, a sound so constant it felt like it was vibrating inside Silas's teeth. He was escorted into the subterranean vaults of the High Warden. The air here was chilled, calibrated for the neural-sensitive Sylvan Kin who processed information through skin conduction. Thousands of digital records floated in the air like dust motes, each one a life, a soldier, a tactical variable. Alara stood in the center of the vault. She was taller than he expected. Her neural veins were not indigo, but a deep royal violet that traced the curve of her jaw. and disappeared into the high collar of her uniform. She didn't turn around when he entered. She was watching a tactical hololith of the obsidian phalanx's movements at the dust rims. "You were an extraction specialist for the outer rims," Alara said. Her voice didn't carry the arrogance of the envoys. It carried a weight of exhaustion that Silas recognized. 200 missions, total casualties, 0. "I'm good at running away, Warden," Silas said, his boots clicking too loudly on the polished floor. "That's not exactly the resume of a war hero." "I don't need a hero," she said, finally turning to face him. As her gaze landed on him, the silver-veined patterns on her skin shifted. They didn't just pulse, they aligned themselves toward him, a warmth-seeking alignment that made the air between them feel suddenly uncomfortably thick. It was a biological surrender she clearly hadn't authorized. I found myself wondering if she realized how much her own body was betraying her professional composure. "The phalanx expects a wall," Ilara continued, her voice tightening as she fought the resonance. "Our grand strategists want to meet their fire with our own. They want a beautiful, symmetric slaughter. But the Aegis Weave is not a weapon of destruction. It is a system of redirection. To use it, we need a mind that values the exit more than the kill." "So you bought a mechanic," Silas said. He noticed a small, stubborn grease smudge on the corner of the pristine tactical hololith. It stood out against the perfect light. He felt an irrational, distracting urge to rub it off with his thumb. "I bought a perspective," she corrected. "The council is waiting. They think I have lost my mind by choosing a human. No, not a human. A frontier civilian to lead our defense. We are going to show them a simulation. You will provide the tactical vectoring. I will provide the neural interface." "And the marriage?" Silas asked. "The strategic betrothal? Is that part of the vectoring too?" Ilara's throat hummed, a low frequency that Silas felt in his own chest cavity. "The phalanx will not attack a world they believe is unified by blood and bond. It is a calculated deterrent. Nothing more." "Right," Silas said. "Nothing more." They entered the council chamber, a vast amphitheater carved from the living rock of the planet. Grand Strategist Vane sat at the apex, his own neural veins glowing with a harsh, judgmental light. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy metallic tang of the Aegis Weave's primary capacitors. Silas felt like a ghost in a machine. When he was still wearing his grease-stained flight jacket, he still smelled like Outpost Zephyr. He felt the eyes of 1,000 sylvan kin on him, their collective resonance creating a psychic static that made his head ache. "Begin the simulation," Vane commanded. The room went dark. A massive three-dimensional representation of Ethelgard appeared in the center of the chamber. A fleet of phalanx warships, black and jagged like obsidian shards, began their approach. Silas stepped toward the interface. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic human rhythm that felt dangerously out of place in this world of calibrated pulses. He reached out to the controls, his fingers hovering over the shield harmonics. "Talk to me, Silas," Ilara whispered. She was standing so close he could feel the cold radiance of her skin. And he didn't look at her. He looked at the incoming fleet. He saw the pattern they were forming, a classic pincer movement designed to crush the planetary lattice. "They're not coming for the capital," Silas said. "They're aiming for the secondary relay at the North Pole. If they take that, the whole weave collapses." "The sensors show no movement toward the pole," Vane barked from the darkness. "Your sensors are looking for heat," Silas snapped. "I'm looking for the shadow. Look at the way they're venting their drive gases. They're masking a sublight strike team." He began to move the shield sectors, his hands flying across the hololith. He wasn't building a wall, he was building a funnel. "If we drop the shield in Sector 7, Silas muttered, We can bait them into... He stopped. While the grease smudge on the hololith was right over the target zone, it blurred the readings, making it impossible to see the exact alignment of the phalanx lead ship. He felt a sudden, irrational surge of anger at the imperfection. "Silas?" Ilar asked. "The shield," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "We're going to open it. We're going to give them exactly what they want." The council erupted into a chorus of dissonant harmonics. The simulation didn't fade, it shattered. A real-world proximity alert tore through the council chamber, the sound a jagged, discordant shriek that sent the sylvan kin into a frantic, shimmering resonance. The hololith flared from a calculated gold to a violent, bleeding crimson. Grand Strategist Vane stood, his neural veins flashing a blinding, panicked white. "Why the obsidian phalanx?" Ilara whispered. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at Silas. Her hand reached for his arm, her fingers grazing the rough fabric of his flight jacket. The biological contrast was a physical jolt. Her skin was freezing, a deep space chill that spoke of the massive neural drain she was already beginning to feel as the Aegis weave transitioned to a full combat state. "They used the radiation nebula," Silas muttered, his eyes locked on the sensor ghosts. "They're not masking drive gases anymore. They're riding the interference." "We must engage the primary batteries," Vane roared. "Seal the lattice. Raise every sector to maximum output." "No," Silas said. The word was small, but in the sudden, terrified silence of the chamber, it carried the weight of a kinetic strike. He turned to Ilara, and the air between them was thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy metallic tang of the planetary shield's primary capacitors. "If you seal the lattice, they'll just pound on it until the resonance fractures your people," Silas explained, his voice falling into a rapid, professional clip. "You're a wall. They're a hammer. Eventually the hammer wins. We have to be the net." The neural cost of a redirection at this scale is... The bridge's proximity alarm screamed again, cutting Ilara off mid-sentence as the first wave of phalanx plasma fire slammed into the upper atmosphere. The ceiling of the chamber groaned. Dust filtered down from the ancient rock, settling on Silas's grease-stained boots. "Go to the command chair," Silas commanded. "Now!" They moved. The command deck was a cathedral of light and glass, overlooking the golden canopy of the Aegis weave. Silas dropped into the pilot's seat, his hands immediately finding the familiar haptic interface. Ilara took the neural link throne behind him. As she connected, her entire body arched, her skin erupting in a violent, cascading pulse of violet light as she became the living processor for the world's defense. Silas didn't look back. He couldn't. He felt the faint, rhythmic ticking of a cooling vent beneath his seat. It was a tiny, mechanical heartbeat, a mundane vibration that sounded exactly like the failing life support on his old shuttle back at the rims. It was the only thing keeping him grounded, while the world outside turned into a kaleidoscope of violence. The phalanx fleet emerged from the nebula like jagged obsidian teeth. Hundreds of ships, thousands of cannons. "I'm dropping Sector 4, Silas said. "Treason!" Vane's voice crackled over the comms. "You are opening the throat of the world." "I'm giving them a target," Silas countered. He pulled the manual override. On the massive view screen, a gaping hole appeared in the planetary shield directly above the Ethelgard bastion. To the phalanx, it looked like a catastrophic failure. It looked like an invitation. The enemy fleet pivoted as one, their drives flaring as they dove toward the gap. They were a bottleneck now, a concentrated stream of metal and fire pouring into a single narrow corridor. "Now, Ilara!" Silas shouted. He felt her response before he saw it. A wave of cold psychic static washed over him, a pressure so intense his vision blurred. Alara wasn't just siphoning energy, she was reaching out into the vacuum. Her neural sensitivity tuned to the very frequency of the incoming plasma fire. The Aegis weave didn't just close, it twisted. As the Phalanx fleet entered the gap, the golden light of the shield didn't act as a barrier, but as a lens, siphoning the raw, kinetic energy of the enemy's own weapons and feeding it back into the lattice in a cascading loop of redirected force that left the black ships tumbling through space like dead leaves in a gale. It was a masterpiece of non-lethal geometry. The ships didn't explode. They simply stopped. Their systems overloaded by their own redirected fire, the Phalanx armada sat dead in the water, drifting harmlessly above the capital. Silence. Silas slumped in his chair. His heart was a frantic, irregular drum. He reached for his chipped ceramic mug, which had been placed in a recessed holder on the console. It was filled with palace-grade stim brew now, but he didn't drink. He just felt the warmth of the ceramic against his palms. "Casualties?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Zero," Ilara replied. Her voice was thin, brittle. She was still slumped in the neural throne, her skin pale, the violet veins barely a faint trace of silver. Her eyes were open, but they were dark, reflecting the shifting gold of the shield. "They're surrendering," she said. "They don't understand how they're still alive. They have no choice but to talk." Vane and the council entered the deck. There was no shouting now. There was only a heavy, stunned reverence. Vane looked at the screen, then at the human pilot in the grease-stained jacket, then at his warden. "And the Phalanx has requested terms," Vane said, his voice stripped of its arrogance. "They believe we possess a weapon of infinite power. They do not realize we simply stopped fighting." "We didn't stop," Silas said, finally taking a sip of the brew. "We just changed the rules." "The council has reached a decision," Vane continued, stepping forward. "The mandate stands. The strategic union between the Sylvan kin and the master pilot is to be formalized. You will lead the reconstruction of the Aegis weave. Together." Silas looked at Alara. She was watching him, her expression unreadable. The fear of connection wasn't gone. It had simply been eclipsed by the reality of it. They were two beings who were never designed to fit, bound together by a tactical necessity that felt increasingly like a cage. They stood on the high battlements an hour later. Below them, the city was beginning to wake up, the lights of Ethelgard flickering to life as the immediate threat of annihilation faded. The sky was a bruised purple, the gold of the shield now a soft, pulsing amber that felt less like armor and more like a veil. Silas held his mug. The wind up here was sharp, carrying the scent of dry stone and ancient dust. He felt Alara move to stand beside him. She didn't touch him, but he could feel the resonance of her presence. A low-frequency hum that seemed to sync with his own pulse. "You're thinking about the rims," she said. "I'm thinking about the shuttle," Silas admitted. "It's still leaking green fluid on the deck at Zephyr. Someone should probably fix that." "Someone will," Alara said, "but not you." She looked out at the horizon, one at the shield that was now cycling into its new, non-aggressive preservation mode. The harmonics were different now. They weren't a scream. They were a breath. "Is this what you wanted?" Silas asked. "A marriage built on a simulation and a lie." "It wasn't a lie," she said quietly. "It was a strategy. And as you said, the rules have changed." Silas looked down at his mug. The ceramic was chipped, old and completely out of place against the gleaming spires of the bastion. He wondered if he was the mug, a broken thing kept around for its utility, or if he was finally something more. He looked at Alara, whose violet veins were beginning to glow again in the twilight, and he realized he didn't know the answer. Perhaps he never would. The shield pulsed once, a deep, resonant amber that bathed them both in the same borrowed light.